Today, the Supreme Court of Canada upheld a censorship law called the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. They trimmed a few words from it, but they ruled in a 6-0 unanimous decision that in Canada, the government can investigate you, charge you, prosecute you, convict you, and fine you for talking about your feelings in the wrong way. It's a terrible decision, and it was issued by the top court, so it can't be appealed. And even though it only dealt with Saskatchewan, it will be followed in every other Canadian jurisdiction that has a similar Orwellian Human Rights Commission with censorship laws too. The case involved this man, Bill Whatcott, a self-styled Christian activist who, for more than a dozen years, has been going door to door delivering flyers against gay sex. Whatcott is motivated by his own personal story. In his own youth, he had a rough stretch when, he says, he himself engaged in youthful indiscretions involving drug use and gay sex. Now he's done a 180-degree turn, found Jesus, and has been on a one-man campaign against those same things he used to do. Obviously, there's a personal motivation here, and even though he's been called an anti-gay bigot, his own history actually makes the story a little bit less black and white, doesn't it? Whatcott is from Saskatchewan, where he's a nurse. This campaign of his is a part-time hobby. He's easily mocked because, frankly, he's so goofy in how he goes about it. He's pretty low-tech, going door-to-door with flyers, sometimes even on his bicycle. And the flyers he hands out, they don't exactly use the dark arts of fancy marketing or political campaigns. No madmen here. They're literally scrawled in messy handwriting and typed. You can see them here. I'll tell you where I got a copy of these flyers in a moment. Whatcott reminds me a bit of a Canadian version of that U.S. troublemaking media hound, Fred Phelps, and his self-styled Westboro Baptist Church. He's the nutbar who protests with signs like God hates fags or even God hates America. He shows up at funerals of U.S. soldiers and even tried to crash the funeral in Newtown for those kids shot at that school. Except that in Canadian style, Whatcott doesn't crash funerals or really do anything dramatic other than just put junk mail in your mailbox. He's so obviously harmless and so easily poked fun at that he's even been a guest on Jon Stewart's comedy show in the States, The Daily Show. See, that's the right way to deal with a Bill Whatcott or a Fred Phelps if you disagree with them. Ignore them or poke at them. I mean, Fred Phelps only exists courtesy of the media. His church really has no membership to speak of, and even his own family has left him. Whatcott doesn't even try to do that. He doesn't have a church. He just tools around putting unreadable flyers into people's mailboxes. But then the busybodies at Saskatchewan's Human Rights Commission decided to make a federal case out of it, literally. They charged Whatcott with Section 14(1)(b) of that province's Human Rights Code, which bans any public communication that, and I quote, tends to expose to hatred, ridicules, belittles, or otherwise affronts the dignity of any person. Did you know that it was against the law in Saskatchewan to hurt someone's dignity, to make them look ridiculous, to hurt their feelings? Well, they convicted him, of course, and fined him $17,500. He had to pay some of the people he gave his junk mail to, $2,500 to one guy and $5,000 to three others. Seriously, for giving them a flyer they didn't like, he had to pay him $17,500. Now, Whatcott appealed, and then appealed again all the way to the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal, the highest court in that province, and they acquitted him. Let me quote from the very wise Court of Appeal decision in this case written by Justice Jean Ann Smith, who wrote, and I quote, "The impugned expression is essentially directed to disapprobation of same-sex sexual conduct in a context of comment on issues of public policy or sexual morality. Its limitation is not justifiable in a free and democratic society." Now, there's a lot of $100 words in there, so what she's really saying is, look, Whatcott's flyers against gay sex were comments about public policy and morality, and you're allowed to have opinions about those things in a democracy. So the case against Whatcott was thrown out. Except that the Human Rights Commission industry in this country, 14 different Human Rights Commissions, at least 200 full-time staff, dozens of lawyers, well, they couldn't allow this censorship law to go down. I mean, they might all have to get real jobs for a living if that happens. So the censors at the Human Rights Commission appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. And look at this. Literally 41 lawyers joined the fight over this censorship law. I counted all these, 41 lawyers, plus the 6 judges, too, who are, of course, lawyers. 47 lawyers made a living off this fight. The court heard the appeal in 2011, but they only released their decision today. Why did it take them so long? I think it's because they couldn't agree. I think the court was split. I mean, you have judges who historically have been on the side of freedom of speech, like Beverly McLaughlin, the Chief Justice. As I pointed out yesterday, she wrote a passionate defense of free speech back in 1990, the last time the Supreme Court dealt with censorship laws. And then you have this censorship wing of the court with people like Rosalie Abella. But instead of having a majority ruling and a dissenting view, I think the Chief Justice told them all to force a compromise, because the ruling today is so incoherent, so mixed up, so schizophrenic, and so long, over 100 pages. But that's the thing about freedom of speech. You can't split it down the middle. Either you're allowed to say something or you're not. It's on, off, yes, no, free, unfree. It's bizarre that 6 judges tried to write this thing by committee and to blend a yes, no into a yes, no, because it just doesn't make any sense. Frankly, it's an embarrassment to the court. I mean, the very fact that the court, in the era of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of religion, was actually discussing for 100 pages just the right way to regulate human feelings, is embarrassing for a free country. But look at this. This is an actual chapter title in the ruling, quote, "Dealing with the inherent subjectivity of the emotion of hatred." This is what the court wrote about for 100 pages. The court was dealing with human feelings of hatred. They're trying to ban those. But you can no more ban hate than you can ban love. Now, either you acknowledge that and only seek to ban actual crimes like punching someone, or you try to stop people from feeling feelings. And as you can see, they went for the feelings regulation. Here's what Judge Marshall Rothstein, the judge who wrote the ruling on behalf of the unanimous 6 judges, had to say, and I quote, "The prohibition of hate speech is not designed to censor ideas or to compel anyone to think correctly. Similarly, it is irrelevant whether the author of the expression intended to incite hatred or discriminatory treatment or other harmful conduct toward the protected group. The key is to determine the likely effect of the expression on its audience." But that's just not true, is it? I mean, Bill Whatcott is not being punished because he was a trespasser or violent. He is being punished precisely because of his views, which were politically normal just 20 years ago in Canada, and in fact are held by a large number of Canadians still and are contained within books with names like the Bible and the Quran and the Torah. Well, now they're just called hateful and illegal. Now, what Bill Whatcott has been puttering away for more than a dozen years here, the only victims have been recycling bins. He hasn't hurt anyone. In fact, he's been roughed up a bit. But Rothstein justifies taking away his free speech and yours by saying, look, if we don't watch it, this Whatcott guy, it could lead to another Holocaust. Do you think I'm exaggerating? Let me quote, "Hate speech always denies fundamental rights. As the majority becomes desensitized by the effects of hate speech, the concern is that some members of society will demonstrate their rejection of the vulnerable group through conduct. Hate speech lays the groundwork for later broad attacks on vulnerable groups. These attacks can range from discrimination to ostracism, segregation, deportation, violence, and in the most extreme cases, to genocide." Seriously? Seriously? Do you feel unsafe in Canada? Do you think we're all gonna deport the gays now? To have mass lynchings now? Does Rothstein and his fellow millionaires on the court, who all live in Tony neighborhoods, gated communities probably have private security, are they so out of touch with the rest of Canada that they think we're all just little barbarians who, because we get some flyer, are now going to go out and kill someone? Which, by the way, happens to already be against the criminal code. But it's not even true, is it? I mean, ever in history, take the United States and slavery. I mean, there was plenty of anti-black hate speech in both the North and the South, but only in the South was slavery legal. In the North, it wasn't, and that's my point. It wasn't the bad words that put blacks in chains. It was real violations of their real rights, their right to be free. Same thing in Nazi Germany. It wasn't the insults that Hitler spewed against the Jews that killed the Jews. In fact, when Hitler took over, he had no legal way to harm a single Jew. He had to, as the government, take legal rights away from Jews, pass new laws to destroy their property rights, economic rights, rights to self-defense, rights to life, before the Holocaust could happen. His words didn't kill Jews. His crimes of violence did. The counterfeit right not to be offended wouldn't have saved a single Jew, but the real right to life and liberty would have. After the break, I'll show you how Supreme Court Judge Rothstein tried to justify this censorship. That's next on The Source. We're talking about a terrible unanimous decision by the Supreme Court to uphold Canada's censorship laws. The judgment was written by Justice Marshall Rothstein. He said that sure, he's censoring Bill Whatcott, but if he doesn't censor Whatcott, Whatcott will be able to silence others. Get this thinking, and I quote, "A particularly insidious aspect of hate speech is that it acts to cut off any path of reply by the group under attack." That's what Rothstein wrote today. But hang on, how did Bill Whatcott cut off any debate? How did he silence anyone? How did he tell them they couldn't talk or campaign or go door to door? All he's done is try to appeal to people himself, to try to persuade them of his views. I really don't think it worked. He's just handing out these flyers. But how has he been the censor here? In fact, hasn't Bill Whatcott actually been a permanent, continuous, teachable moment for the other side? Hasn't he spurred 100 pro-gay rights newspaper columns? Hasn't he raised at least $1 million for gay rights organizations in fundraising letters? Has Bill Whatcott actually shut anyone up? Has he even tried to? No. Like Fred Phelps, most people just ignore him, other than bored reporters looking for some excitement. And Whatcott even isn't that exciting. But here's the thing, and this really bugs me. 3 out of the 6 judges in this case just happen to be Jewish. Rothstein himself and Judges Abella and Fish. And guess what? They just happen to de facto criminalize the Christian belief that homosexuality is a sin. And again, let me quote from the ruling written by Rothstein. Quote, "If expression targeting certain sexual behavior is framed in such a way as to expose persons of an identifiable sexual orientation to what is objectively viewed as detestation and vilification, it cannot be said that such speech only targets the behavior. It quite clearly targets the vulnerable group," unquote. Now, that's a neat trick. Whatcott says he's against gay sex. Not people who have had gay sex, he himself has. He's against the conduct. He's reformed himself, he says. And he quotes a best-selling book for his case called, the Bible. But Judge Rothstein says being against gay sex is really just being against gays, so that's hateful, so now that's illegal. 3 Jews just wrote a judgment saying that hating gay sex is tantamount to hating gays, and so the Bible, it must follow, is hate speech. These brave Jews might want to reread their own Torah, of course, or the Quran if that's their preference, but that's the thing. In the 36-year history of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, not a single Jew or Muslim or Sikh or Tamil or any other minority group has ever been prosecuted for hate speech, just Christians. Every single day across this country in extremist mosques, even on street corners, like this Sharia law display in downtown Toronto and Dundas Square, they spew more anti-gay propaganda than Whatcott has in his whole life. And of course, the Sharia punishment for being gay is death. I wonder if this liberal Supreme Court would have been so bold as to criminalize a Muslim defendant and his Quran. Oh, no worries. Muslims have never been prosecuted, so have at the Christians, boys. Rothstein couldn't be clearer. He doesn't care if you're Bill Whatcott, a priest, or even the Pope. Your religious beliefs, if they're Christian, are not protected from this law. Let me quote again. "Allowing the dissemination of hate speech to be excused by a sincerely held belief would, in effect, provide an absolute defense and would gut the provision of its effectiveness," unquote. But then Rothstein drops the mask. It's one thing to ban opinions and views, but look at these 9 words. Quote, "Not all truthful statements must be free from restriction," unquote. Really? Really? So there are some factual statements, not opinions now, not personal views, not religious views, not comments, but actual facts like 2 + 2 = 4, or the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Some factual statements that can be banned now too, if they cause the emotional feeling of hate or detestation. Really? And this is a first world country upholding this law, and the court's unanimous, is it? This ruling is 100+ pages of dangerous mush. I'm embarrassed for the court, especially for Rothstein, who had to sign his name to this, and for Justice McLaughlin, who has just undone 2 decades of her own reputation as a freedom-loving judge. But Canada's lawyers and human rights commissions are rejoicing. It's open season on Christians now, open season on people who have the wrong emotions. The judges actually say that, well, hate might be okay, but not detestation. Oh, well, that sure cleared the law up, didn't it? Believe it or not, some haters will actually love this law too, like the late David Ahenekyu, the Indian chief who made an anti-Semitic comment at a conference once and was prosecuted for it for years. Now, he loved it because the government made him into an international celebrity. They promoted his views farther than he ever could. They made him famous, and his odious views too. Look, those anti-gay flyers I showed you at the beginning of the show, I couldn't find them online, except for today, because they're actually on the Supreme Court's webpage. The Supreme Court of Canada is itself publishing Bill Whatcott's hateful flyers. That's how I saw them. Thousands more too, I'm sure. Maybe we can sue the Supreme Court for spreading hatred now too. Huh, what a joke. But here's a question. The average age of these 6 judges is 69. How many of them are familiar with Twitter or text messaging or a half dozen other new technologies for sharing information that's so powerful and quick and undetectable that even tyrants like Syria's Bashar Assad can't stamp them out? I bet some of these old judges don't even use a computer. I bet they handwrite their judgments or dictate them for a secretary. I bet they have interns come in to stop their VCR clocks from flashing 12 noon. These relics of the 20th century are like King Canute ordering the tide to stop. Look, this ruling is un-Canadian. It's unfree. It's incoherent. It's contrary to the court's good trend towards freedom until now. It's anti-Christian. It's going to cause nuisance lawsuits to bloom. But perhaps most of all, it's just pitiful. It's 6 angry old government lawyers called judges doing what that young chap from Carleton University, remember him, Arun Smith, did a few weeks ago when he tore down his school's free speech wall because he didn't like what was written on it. Except that Arun Smith didn't spend 100 pages explaining why he gets to say what he wants and he gets to read what he wants, but we're too dumb to be trusted with free speech because we might get all genocide-y if we're allowed to read something. Canada's elected officials must repeal the laws that our Supreme Court was too cowardly to strike down. And ordinary Canadians, you and me, well, we must continue to live our lives as free men and women in the 21st century and say and write and text and Facebook and tweet whatever the hell we want. Whatever those doddering old relics on the court tell us.